The early morning fog lingered over the trees like a heavy curtain as the first golden rays of sunlight filtered through the forest canopy. A faint rhythm echoed through the woods, steady, deliberate. Thud, thud, thud. It wasn't an animal or the wind. It was the sound of a hammer being swung by a woman who refused to break. Amelia's hands were raw and wrapped in makeshift bandages. Every nail she drove into the thick wooden planks of her half-finished cabin was an act of willpower. She paused, panting slightly, her hand instinctively resting on the curve of her belly. 8 months pregnant, and out here in the Montana wilderness with no one to help her but herself. She stared at the cabin walls around her, bare, uneven, rough, but hers. It was nothing special by anyone else's standards. The floor was still dirt in places. The windows were just open spaces for now. But it was more than just shelter. It was freedom. It was survival. It was proof she hadn't given up. Her journey here hadn't been easy. After her husband's sudden death from a construction accident in the city, the life they had built vanished almost overnight. Bills piled up, friends disappeared, and then came the discovery that she was pregnant, just weeks after his funeral. With no income and no one left to lean on, she found a deed tucked inside a dusty drawer, 5 acres of untouched land in Montana. A dream he once had. She packed what little she owned and left behind the apartment and its memories. The townspeople in the nearest village, some 30 miles away, had tried to talk her out of it. A pregnant woman building a cabin alone in the middle of nowhere. Madness, they said, but Amelia only smiled, nodded politely, and drove past them. Her days began at dawn and ended when the stars came out. She studied survival manuals by flashlight, watched online tutorials whenever she found a signal, and practiced again and again. She cried at night sometimes, but never during the day. During the day, she built. And now, standing in the clearing as the breeze stirred the evergreens and the smell of sawdust and earth surrounded her, she whispered softly to her unborn child, "We're going to make it. Mama's got you, and no one's ever going to take that from us." She picked up the hammer and kept going. 3 days after the latest supply run to town, the sound of tires crunching gravel echoed through Amelia's clearing. She paused mid-swing, hammer held high, squinting toward the tree line as a shiny black truck pulled into view, its polished surface out of place in the rugged wilderness. The door opened with a metallic creak, and out stepped a man who looked like he'd walked straight out of a Western novel. He wore a weathered cowboy hat that shaded a strong face etched with sunlines, boots caked in red dust, and jeans that hung just right on a tall, broad-shouldered frame. A gold belt buckle gleamed in the sun, and a leather jacket slung over his shoulder spoke of money, but not laziness. He leaned against his truck, watching her. "You tryin' to raise a barn or raise a baby?" he called out, voice smooth but teasing. Amelia didn't even flinch. She drove the nail into the plank, hard and clean, before turning to face him. "Both. Unless you're here to help, you're in the way." Colt Maddox wasn't used to women talking to him like that. Most softened around him, smiling too wide, asking too many questions. But this woman, dusty and strong and very pregnant, didn't even pause to be impressed. "I'm Colt," he said, approaching slowly, "like you would a wild horse. I own Maddox Ranch just over the ridge. Heard some folks talkin' in town about a lady out here building her own place. Thought I'd see for myself." "Well, you've seen," Amelia replied coolly, wiping her brow. "You can go now." But something about her made Colt stay. Maybe it was the way she stood, back straight despite the weight she carried. Maybe it was the fire in her eyes, the way she didn't ask for help, didn't even want it. "You always this friendly to visitors?" "Only the ones who show up with curiosity instead of kindness." He gave a half smile, tipping his hat. "Fair enough. Just didn't think someone in your condition would be doing all this alone." Her gaze sharpened. "What condition is that?" "Pregnant, brave, stubborn," he said, then paused. "Strong." That last word settled between them like a challenge and a compliment. For the first time, Amelia allowed a slight smile to pull at the corner of her lips. "See, that's right. And I don't break easy." Colt looked around the clearing, at the crooked walls, the stack of lumber, and the woman holding it all together. "I'll be around," he said finally, stepping back toward his truck. "Not to fix anything, just to see what strength really looks like." And with that, he drove off, leaving a trail of dust and curiosity in his wake. By late afternoon, dark clouds began to gather over the ridge like a warning. Amelia had noticed the shift in the air, the stillness, the pressure, but she kept working, hoping to at least finish bracing the west wall before nightfall. The winds had been picking up all week, and she knew her half-built home was vulnerable. She paused only to tighten the tarp over her tools and adjust the lantern hanging from a nail on the post. But by nightfall, the sky erupted. Thunder cracked across the valley like a gunshot, and within minutes, sheets of rain pounded down, drowning the sounds of the forest. The tarp Amelia had secured flapped wildly in the wind like a wounded bird. She ran out into the chaos, one hand gripping her belly, the other clutching a length of rope. She tried to hold the tarp in place, tying it tighter, but a gust of wind tore it clean from the beams and sent it flying into the trees. A crash behind her made her turn. One of the temporary support beams had snapped and fallen. Her half-roof trembled. Panic surged through her. The walls might not hold. And then, headlights. A truck's beam cut through the downpour, climbing over the muddy ridge, engine roaring against the storm. Colt. Amelia stumbled back toward the house, slipping in the mud, trying to keep her balance. Before she could call out, Colt had leapt from the truck, rain soaking him instantly. He ran to her side without a word and threw his coat around her shoulders. "Get inside, now," he shouted. She shook her head. "The frame, it's gonna collapse." Colt grabbed 2 support beams from the back of his truck. "Then we fix it together." In the pouring rain, they worked side by side, nailing braces into the beams, tying down the roof with heavier tarp, shouting instructions over the wind. Amelia's fingers trembled from cold and exhaustion, but she didn't stop. When it was done, when the last brace held firm and the structure finally stopped groaning under the storm's weight, they both collapsed inside the cabin, soaked to the bone, gasping for breath. Water dripped from her hair. Colt sat nearby, his chest rising and falling as he looked around the barely standing cabin. "You didn't have to come," Amelia said softly. "I couldn't not," he replied, brushing wet strands from his eyes. "Strength like yours, it shouldn't have to stand alone." And for the first time since her husband died, Amelia didn't feel entirely alone. Winter settled gently across the valley like a white blanket, softening the sharp edges of the wilderness. Snowflakes danced outside the cabin window, but inside, warmth glowed from the wood-burning stove. The cabin, once a skeleton of hope, now stood strong. With 4 solid walls, a patched roof, and a hand-carved porch that faced the sunrise. Amelia stood near the fireplace, rocking gently, her swollen belly now gone, replaced by a bundle wrapped in a wool blanket. The baby's tiny fingers curled around hers, and her eyes brimmed with emotion as she gazed down at the little girl cradled against her chest. Hope, that's what she had named her. Colt sat nearby, hands calloused but gentle as he tightened a loose board on the crib they'd built together. Since the storm, he had returned nearly every day, not with grand gestures or empty promises, but with firewood, tools, and quiet reassurance. He never tried to take over. He just showed up. When Amelia needed silence, he offered it. When she needed strength, he shared it. "You ever imagine you'd be fixing cribs in a woman's cabin in the middle of nowhere?" Amelia asked, a playful smile in her voice. Colt chuckled, brushing sawdust from his jeans. "Not in 100 years. But I reckon I've never been more sure of anything." He stood and walked to her side, his eyes settling on the baby in her arms. "She looks like you." "Poor thing," Amelia teased softly, but her voice cracked with emotion. "No," he said gently, "she looks strong. Just like her mama." There was a pause. The fire popped and hissed as a log settled deeper into the flames. Amelia leaned her head against Colt's shoulder, something she never thought she'd do again, not since her world had fallen apart. But this felt different. It wasn't about being saved. It was about finding someone who believed in her strength, not just admired it. "I didn't think I could do it," she whispered. "You did," he replied, wrapping an arm around her. "You built this life with your bare hands. I just had the good fortune to witness it." The baby stirred slightly, then sighed, settling back into sleep. And in that tiny cabin, under a snow-filled sky, 3 hearts beat with quiet hope. Not the kind born from fairy tales, but from grit, resilience, and the kind of love that doesn't rescue, it respects. It was the beginning of something real. Something lasting. Something earned.